The purpose of this video is to share my reflections of how my upbringing in Alaska and connection to the lands have impacted my values and my understanding of care for the environment, while weaving these values into my learnings of Maori culture from time immersed in Aotearoa, New Zealand, July 2023. Learning about Indigenous storytelling and ways of knowing throughout my life have been impactful parts of my development as an empathetic human with respect for the environment. Susitna Mountain is visible from where I grew up in Alaska, but I have always referred to her as Sleeping Lady. I grew up with a legend from a Dena'ina elder which tells the story of a mountain people, a community of giants, who gathered at the Susitna River many millennia ago. One of the women said she would lay down next to her beloved river to become Susitna Mountain. Her relatives followed, forming other mountains in Alaska, including Denali. The more commonly known version of this legend has been taken from its indigenous origins, saying that the giantess Susitna laid down to wait for her lover, a warrior giant, to return from battle. He perished in the battle, so she remains sleeping to this day. I grew up with both versions of the story, only learning later in life that the romanticized version did not have indigenous origins. What stuck with me from the stories was that this beautiful mountain I could see from my hometown, growing up, was more than just a landform created by repeated glaciation. Storytelling connected me to the land and gave me empathy for a place originally inhabited by a people who had been in the area long before my own family of settler colonizers. In Papaya, the Maori introduction of self, the takonga of referencing environmental features and ancestors in introductions is important in making connection. During our time in Aotearoa, we heard Papaya from the Maori people we met. This is a beautiful form of introduction that helps connect us to each other and to the lands. So, my name is Britt Stone. I was born and raised in the land of the Dena'ina Athabaskan and home of Denali, a mountain whose name means the Great One. I spent my earliest years growing up in Talkeetna alongside the confluence of the Talkeetna, Chilitna, and Susitna rivers. I was the great-grandchild of settler colonizers from Italy, France, and Germany. The first few years of my life were spent in a cabin in Talkeetna, Alaska with a wood-burning stove for heat and an outhouse. Like many first-generation Alaskans born in the 1980s, I had a parent involved in the construction of the Alaska Pipeline. My father worked on the pipeline in the 1970s. I was only 4 years old when the Exxon Valdez oil spill occurred in 1989, but I grew up with stories from friends and family who assisted with the cleanup efforts. The resulting destruction to the marine life and birds haunted me throughout my childhood. The Valdez oil spill impacted my understanding of how fragile the environment was and how easily humans could cause harm. When I was 7, my mother and I moved to Nome, Alaska, home of the Inupiaq, where she was hired as a nurse in the hospital. For 3 years, I explored the tundra with friends and watched the end of the Iditarod race each winter. There were no trees in Nome, so every January the city invited us to put our Christmas trees out on the sea ice to make Nome's seasonal forest. Nome is on the Bering Sea in northern Alaska, but is actually a couple of degrees south of the Arctic Circle. The only mammals we saw up there were reindeer herds migrating through the tundra and musk oxen. I knew there were wolves and brown bears in the region, but I never saw them in the wild. Friends from Anchorage visited us in Nome during the summer of 1993, and we traveled out to Pilgrim Hot Springs and later that day to Safety, Alaska, to show them the final checkpoint of the Iditarod just 22 miles out of town. In Safety, we encountered some local Inupiat people who offered to take us out to see a beached whale. Our Inupiat guides were excited because large bear prints had been seen near the beached whale. There were whispers that the prints were too large to be from a brown bear. They offered to let me stand on top of the whale for a picture, but I quickly declined. I remember feeling sad for the whale and curious about the bear prints. I had never seen a bear in Nome. As it would turn out, the bear prints belonged to a juvenile male polar bear, which we found out about 2 days later when gold miners camping on the beach in Nome were woken up by the curious creature. Remarkably, no human was harmed, but the bear was shot and some local Inupiat divided the meat amongst the tribal members. I mourned for the bear at the time, but as I gained more perspective in life, I was grateful to the local tribe for not letting his death be in vain. The adults around me talked about how the declining sea ice likely drove the hungry bear down to Nome. Polar bears did not travel as far down as Nome typically, and this was my first memory of climate change happening before my eyes. The Arctic sea ice had decreased significantly in 1993, so it made sense that the bear got stranded further south from his habitat. This early experience of the consequences of climate change stuck with me my entire life. I was privileged to attend a K-12 school that emphasized experiential learning, and I had many opportunities to spend days and weeks out in Alaska's wilderness learning about subjects such as art and science. Waking up in a tent on the beach in Kachemak Bay to breaching humpback whales is an incredible experience. Searching tidal pools off the coast of Seldovia and then drawing the creatures I found to later identify helped build my passion for the environment around me. I recognized early on that most Alaskans did not have the opportunity to see these places, as they are only accessible by boat or small plane. Due to the experiences I had in high school along with an engaged science teacher, I decided to take an advanced placement biology course my junior year of high school. I was fascinated with the medicinal use of plants, and when the time came for us to propose science fair projects for the statewide competition, I jumped on my teacher's offer to let me harvest Devil's Club on her property for my project so that I could study the antibiotic properties. She had given me a newspaper article about how some Alaskan natives use Devil's Club to help cure illness, and I was hooked. Without my teacher's support, I would not have gained access to a level 3 lab in Anchorage or access to E. coli and other bacteria to test tinctures and extracts of Devil's Club root. I recognize this privilege and I am grateful. For a few months, I spent many days after school in this lab, and the results were exciting. I was able to show that while Devil's Club extracts did not touch E. coli, they were effective against Bacillus cereus. To my surprise, I won first place in the Alaska State Science and Engineering Fair among 400 competitors, and I ended up competing in the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair in Cleveland, Ohio. My mother's unexpected death during my second year of college greatly impacted me, as she was my first role model in activism and protest against environmental harms. I wanted to make a difference with my future career, and I wanted to protect Alaska, especially with the climate change I was witnessing as Alaska's summers broke heat records and fires ravaged the lands. I switched majors a few times before settling on environmental policy and planning. Courses like environmental ethics and land use planning resonated with me. I learned about the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, where the government formed Alaska's 12 regions and native corporations. The act gave Alaska Native tribal leaders the ability to own and manage surface and subsurface rights to the land. I learned about ANILCA, the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, which was signed into law in 1980 to protect Alaska's lands and natural resources for the public interest as well as to protect them for subsistence use by rural Alaskans. My capstone project focused on recycling efforts around the state of Alaska, with the rural village of Bethel leading the charge on reducing single-use plastics back in 2009 by prohibiting plastic bags. The largest city in Alaska, Anchorage, wouldn't follow suit for another decade. After graduation, I quickly discovered that most job opportunities in my field in Alaska were within natural resource extraction. This is why I took a role as the office manager of Alaska's only nonprofit public interest environmental law firm, Trustees for Alaska. It was at this organization that I was empowered to expand into communication work. I attempted to tell the story of the important work the attorneys were doing for Alaska's environment using social media and our website, which I helped overhaul. Pebble Mine was the largest case while I worked with Trustees, and our clients were the Bristol Bay Alaska Native Corporation, who were taking on the state of Alaska because the proposed Pebble Mine would surely contaminate Bristol Bay, impacting the salmon fisheries and way of life for many indigenous peoples. In January 2023, the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers would effectively put a stop to this mine after more than a decade's battle. My role in this case was minuscule, but I'm proud of Trustees for Alaska and the work they did to stop the mine. My passion for communication led me to Spokane and Gonzaga and the Masters in Communication and Leadership Studies program, and now the doctoral program. Alaska will always be my home. I visit once a year and will be headed there in less than 3 weeks to set my feet on the ground and feel connected to the lands I still love. When I first began researching New Zealand for this course in February of this year, I was saddened to see the destruction of Cyclone Gabrielle, which devastated parts of the North Island with rain, wind, flooding, and landslides during their normally dry summer season. As I started digging into the news stories to get a sense of what had happened, I saw people displaced and homes destroyed. When we first arrived to Aotearoa for the course, we met many people, both Maori and Pakeha, who cited climate change as one of the largest threats to the lands and attributed Cyclone Gabrielle a consequence of this climate change. In 2010, it was predicted that coastal areas of New Zealand would experience increased intensity of cyclones, rises in sea level, more storm surges, and increased coastal erosion. While visiting the Piritahi Marae on Waiheke Island, Maori leader and environmental activist Bianca Ranson spoke of her fears that part of their land would be underwater in just a few more years. During our travels, we learned more about the Maori concept of kaiti akitanga, which means an obligation to the environment. Indigenous stories I have heard throughout my lifetime have had a common thread of connection to the lands and all life within. The Maori creation story of Ronganui and Papatuanuku, Sky Father and Earth Mother, says that all life and light in the natural environment was locked between their tight embrace until their son Tane, the god of the forests and birds, stretched out his legs to separate the two, bringing light into the world and allowing life to flourish. During our visit to Tane Mahuta, the large kauri tree, we heard that creation story from a Maori guide, as well as the story of the kauri and the sperm whale. While these stories belong to the Maori, I want to share them here as I think they help connect us to the land.
Small feet. You can't move very fast, you can't fly like your birds. Give him to me. Give him to me, Tani. And I will look after him. He can be a child of the sea and he can go explore with.
I saw this story repeated in several places throughout Aotearoa, including the Maori Natural History section of the War Memorial Museum in Auckland. My passion for indigenous plant medicine did not end in high school. While I was in Aotearoa for the course, I found a children's book written both in Maori and English about medicinal plant use. In the book, the grandmother, Mihi, thanks Tane Mahuta for allowing her to take leaves from a tree for medicine for her family. Rongoa is the traditional Maori medicine. Using a bilingual children's book is a powerful way to share this Rongoa knowledge with future generations in the form of a story. In thinking of a meaningful tattoo to represent my time in Aotearoa, I decided to get some manuka flowers on my lower leg during my last day in Auckland. Manuka honey is antimicrobial, antibacterial, and has burn and wound healing properties. Connection to the land is important, but so many Indigenous peoples have had theirs ripped away from them by colonial settlers. The stories of the trauma felt by the Maori and other Indigenous groups are not mine to tell, but I would like to share this clip taken during our time at the Hihiawa Cultural Center in Whangarei from Janet Hetaraka, a Maori kaitiaki who played an integral role in founding the center.
Most of our cultural practices have been outlawed or denied to us from access. We don't have access to the natural resources. So it's been a long struggle of many people since the signing of the treaty, which you've been to Waitangi and you've got the story about the treaty. The treaty was ignored for 100 years. I suppose the resurgence began when our soldiers came back after serving in World War II. They went to fight in Egypt and Italy and places like that with the Allied forces, thinking that when they came home they would be more honoured.
Citizens.
Yeah, the price of citizenship. When they came home they found their lands had been confiscated and were actually paid to the Pākehā or non-Māori soldiers as their reward for going to war. So, we're not here to dwell on the injustices, but, we're all part of that. We all carry that mamae, that hurt, that legacy of what was done to our people only 3 generations ago. And we've carried that intergenerational stuff with us.
The intent of this video was to reflect on the development of my values that relate to the care of the environment and how I think direct experiences growing up in Alaska help define those values. Connection to the environment around me has been crucial in my development and care for the earth. Seeing firsthand the impact of climate change on the environment while growing up in Alaska has been a catalyst in my life's journey. According to Dr. Isla Emery, who we had the honor of meeting along with Dr. Heather Kame in Aotearoa, the antidote to colonialism is natural spaces like forests. Decolonization is not a comfortable topic, nor should it be. To paraphrase Dr. Heather Kame, you won't get to the finish line, so just be open to making a contribution and do your bit and get out of the way. Future research interests sparked by this course include the development of decolonization courses connected to Native Alaskan lands and how the United States has chosen to take land from Indigenous peoples. I believe that Indigenous ways of knowing could save the planet if the descendants of settler colonizers choose to listen and act. I'd like to further explore how communication and storytelling are integral parts of learning from other cultures. I end with this short video I posted to social media to represent my time spent in this course in Aotearoa and my continued passion to use communication to help connect us.